Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second of the series of talks we've held on creating awareness on diversity issues. My name is Ruwini Delgode. I'm the co-chair for the Diversity and Equality Subcommittee of the Women Lawyers Association. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I'd like to just say a few words about our diversity and subcommittee. We champion the rights of women lawyers and law students who identify themselves as Indigenous, culturally and linguistically diverse, LGBTIQ, and also people who identify themselves as disabled. With Indigenous members, this year, our committee decided to focus especially on young members. And that is why our speaker today is of particular value to us. I would like to call on Ms. Abhinaya Yogarajan, who is the co-chair of our Diversity and Equality Subcommittee, and she will also be assisted by Jihan Chen during the session. Abhinaya, please go ahead and introduce our speaker.
Awesome. I'm really excited to introduce you guys to Loren. So Loren is a proud Bandjin woman and is currently the Executive Support Officer for Reconciliation at the University of Newcastle. Loren has previously worked as a high school teacher, teaching Aboriginal studies and legal studies, as well as over a decade's experience working as a solicitor in both private practice and government. Loren is passionate about using the law and education as vehicles for reconciliation. I'll hand it over to Loren to begin the session.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Abhinaya and Ruwini, for that introduction. And thank you to everyone for having me here today to have these conversations. I really appreciate the invitation. So yeah, look, before we start, I'll just acknowledge country as well. So I am in Newcastle on our Callaghan campus today. And this campus is located on the land of the Pavalong clan of the Awabakal people. So I acknowledge the country that I'm sitting on today, and also acknowledge any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are online with us today, but also acknowledge your own journeys and you know, what's brought you here today as well. So yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm just going to share some slides with you. If that's okay, just give me 1 second. And while I'm doing that, I guess I just wanted to say that, you know, rather than this just be a presentation with me sort of speaking at you for an hour, I'd really love this to be, you know, an open and shared discussion. And so people, if you have questions or, you know, anything that you wanted to add, a comment or anything like that, please feel free to, you know, jump in there. You can use the chat box if you like, or just, you know, come off mute. I'd really just want to emphasize that, you know, a safe space to ask questions and talk about these things. I know that often when we're talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and law and people and issues, sometimes there's a hesitancy to, I guess, ask questions and engage. Sometimes there's a, you know, a feeling that we might say or ask the wrong thing, but I just want to emphasize that, you know, very much a safe space. So if you do have a question or something you'd like to raise, please do so. So can everyone see that, those slides I've popped up there now? Yep, awesome. Thanks, Abhinaya. So that you can see that there, that's beautiful Newcastle. It's not quite as sunny as that today, but beautiful Awabakal country that I'm meeting with you today. Sorry, I've just shared the wrong slides with you. I've got that many slides up on my screen. 1 second. Sorry, guys, just
That's
bear
all right.
with me. Okay. All right, so hopefully people can see that now. I've got the right slides up. Very good. So look, I guess I'll just start by just telling you a bit about who I am and my experience as a law student and as an Aboriginal lawyer. So I grew up off country. So you can see there's a little picture up the top there. That's Hinchinbrook Island up there. So that's my grandmother's country. So I'm a Bandjin woman. And our Bandjin people live solely on that island in Hinchinbrook. It's just up near Gladstone, up near Cairns. You can see it from the mainland. So that's my grandmother's country, and she grew up there and moved down to Sydney when she was a young woman. And I grew up myself in. Sorry, I'm just getting someone's feedback. I've just got myself. Someone's got me on. Thank you. Yeah, so sorry, I grew up off country, so which means that I grew up in another place, and I grew up in Birapai country, which is in Port Macquarie. So look, I was the first person in my family to go to university. I was the first person in my family to graduate from university. And you can see that there's a picture there, and that was from the day that I graduated with my grandparents, my grandmother and grandfather. And it was a very significant time in our family, you know, to have someone go through the whole education system. My grandmother got to year 5 before she was removed from school, and she went on to do some amazing things. I'd like to acknowledge my grandmother. She, whilst only going to school to year 5, ended up becoming very well respected elder, but also she got an Order of Australia, which was given to her by Gough Whitlam for the amazing work that my grandmother did in relation to women's rights and Aboriginal art in particular. So yeah, so that's a bit about my family and where I've come from. And yeah, look, so I did go to high school. I finished high school. I knew that I wanted to do something to, I guess, help our people. I'd seen the work that my grandmother had done, and I'd seen the work that other matriarchs in my family had done. And it was always made very clear to me from a very young age that there was work to be done. That certainly for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we weren't on an equal footing with other people in this country. And these were understandings that were passed on to me, as I said, from a very young age. And it became, I guess, sort of difficult when I came to university as a young law student, I guess, to realise that not everybody had those same understandings that I had, and particularly as a law student. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, about you know, the experiences of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students in legal education. But yeah, certainly it was a challenge for me coming into the law school as an Aboriginal student. But yeah, so that last picture there, you can see there's that bigger image on the right there. That's at our Wallatuka Institute at the University of Newcastle. And that's in my current role. I'm very lucky to be able to work with Wallatuka. And that particular image was actually taken. We held an online forum last year, which also engaged with some of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander law students to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and what that meant for Aboriginal people. And I guess what I wanted to say about that it was just, you know, that was a really, it was a really important movement, and some of our students were directly involved with some of the rallies here in Newcastle, and we were supported by the university. You know, that was something that the university said, this is, you know, this is a topic that people should know about. We're happy to support you in getting this information out there and talking about it in truth telling. So really important, and I'm really proud that the university took that stance and stood beside us with that. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. I've got 3 kids as well who keep me very busy when I'm not doing this job. I did practice as a solicitor for many years, as Abinaja said, and yes, went on later to go and get my teaching degree, and I spent a bit of time teaching in high schools before coming back over here to the university. So that's a bit of a blurb about me. So yeah, look, I guess those experiences for me, both, you know, my personal experiences just as being a young Aboriginal law student and, you know, my experience there personally, but also, you know, having worked here at the university and been a solicitor and seeing the way that, I guess, you know, other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as people's experiences, both as students and in the profession as well. And, you know, I think it was really seeing, for me, it was seeing a lot of the gaps in knowledge for other people in the legal profession that really made me stop and think, wow, this is, you know, it's quite astounding when we have some of the most educated people that you can come across. And it's not just lawyers, but, you know, we have here at the university, you know, professors, doctors, that still have very limited understanding or awareness of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues in this country, that don't have an understanding about, you know, some of the very recent pieces of legislation or policies that have affected Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And it was sort of this realisation, I suppose, that, you know, this knowledge was missing amongst the legal profession, that we had all these super educated people that had very limited understanding about these things. And so when I was practicing and having these conversations, it was sort of alarm bells going off for me. And that's what basically led me back to the university and to teaching. It's, you know, I just see the importance of building this understanding for, you know, not just lawyers, for all graduates that we have coming out of the university. But yeah, particularly, you know, as a practicing lawyer previously, seeing that need for that understanding and that cultural awareness to be developed for all students, you know, not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, but for all students. So briefly, guys, what I was just, these are just some of the points that I was going to cover today. And as I said, please jump in anytime if you wanted to add or ask anything. So I guess just talking a little bit about, you know, why is this a relevant conversation to be having as lawyers? You know, why is reconciliation relevant to us as lawyers, as law students, as people within the legal profession? Why are we even having this conversation, you know? I wanted to talk a little bit about our students' experiences. And so that is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students who are coming in to engage in their legal studies here at the university, but also a little bit about our non-Aboriginal students as well. Why is it important that non-Aboriginal students have you know, access to these understandings in terms of their legal studies? I'll just touch on some of the barriers that have, you know, historical barriers to education and how they have really impacted current day, and some of the opportunities and some of the programs that we're working through here at the University of Newcastle with the law school, but also, you know, opportunities and ways that people can support reconciliation through, you know, their own legal practice, whether you're in private practice or government, you know, even in your private life. What are things that you can do to support reconciliation? So I guess I probably don't need to do too deep a dive into this part here. We do cultural capability training. I should just mention one of the jobs that I do here at the uni is to co-host some of our cultural capability sessions, and they are sessions that every single person, the whole university will be invited to attend. That's the goal, is that every person employed by the university will have to do these cultural capability sessions. And we did some of these sessions with our law school, and we have done them across the university. But I think it's interesting to note that we've never done a session where everyone in that room, as I said, there's, you know, professors and doctors, We've never done a session where someone came out and said, oh, I knew all of that. I knew all of those policies that were in place. I knew all about that legislation. It's never happened. We've never had anybody do that. And we only do, they're 3-hour sessions. We, there's only so much you can cover in 3 hours. We're really skimming the surface of some of these things. So it's really interesting to see that there's still things that people don't know about. And particularly when we're talking to, people in the law school, law lecturers, that are teaching our students who don't have, real great understanding of some of these issues. So you can see just on that side there, for example, and these are just some of the things we talk about in these capability sessions, but talking about the concept of terra nullius, talking about Mabo and the legal implications of that. We talk about the Protection Act. We talk about certificates of exemption that Aboriginal people are required to carry around to be exempt from the Protection Act. We talk about the 1967 referendum, about constitutional recognition. We talk about things like cultural protection and heritage acts. Are our cultural and sacred sites really protected under current legislations? And there's a picture there of the Jukan Gorge caves, which people probably would have heard about in Western Australia. And so we talk about these, these are some very, I guess, not simple, but they're just quite obvious examples, I guess, of ways in which the law has affected Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and continues to do so. So it's not just something that happened in 1788. They're things that have continued to affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. And I know that I'm talking to a room full of lawyers here, so there's, I don't think that I need to really delve too deeply into this, because I would hope and imagine that most people would have some awareness of these things. But I suppose the point is that, I don't think there's as a practicing lawyer, there's no area of law that really this isn't relevant to. There's no area of law, no practice area that you can't, that hasn't affected Aboriginal people and that you can't play a role in reconciliation. And I think that that's, the law in particular has been very difficult to use to formulate this into a way that doesn't sound bad. But look, it's the way that I sort of describe it, it has been a colonising tool. It's been a tool that's been used against Aboriginal people historically. So how can we now spin that on its head? How do we create equality and reconciliation using the tool that was initially used against us? And so, yeah, I think it's really important to have this understanding of some of these historical things. And if people don't know about these things, don't know about some of these legislations and how they've affected Aboriginal people in this country, I would absolutely encourage you to go away and do a bit of research and a bit of reading for yourself. Suffice to say that yes, absolutely, the law is the place of reconciliation. And I guess specifically, we're talking about, I work at the university, we're talking about education. And, the goal really is that we incorporate these understandings and these knowledges into every program that we have at the university. We want people to learn about these things. But yeah, particularly in the law school, I think it's really, it needs to be at the core of our law programs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment in terms of what we've been doing with our law school here at the University of Newcastle. So I just wanted to talk a little bit, guys, about the student experiences, because really, as a university, that's what we're here for. We're here for our students. So, yeah, look, I spoke briefly about my experience as a young student. So yeah, I came to Newcastle from Port Macquarie, so moved away from home, and yeah, look, to be honest, I found law school to be a very intimidating place, and I found it to be a place that I felt very much like the other. I very much felt as though everyone else sort of knew what was going on. Everyone, I don't know, it was very much that feeling of being the other. And that for me didn't really go away until I walked into a property lecture one day and had a fabulous law lecturer. There's another Aboriginal law lecturer named Kevin Williams, who's fantastic, but he walking into that classroom that day and seeing another Aboriginal person there, and the difference in the way that that law course was taught, the different placement of perspective, just the different knowledges and understandings, and the way that we perceive the law and the way that the law affects us. That was a really big positive experience for me, in that it was the first time that I sort of thought, wow, there's a place here for you. That there is this understanding that you have personally as an Aboriginal person can be reflected in your legal study. And that seemed surprising to me. And I guess, it's not to say that at the time I was in law school that, that it was some sort of terribly racist institution where, our experiences were cast aside. But I think that it was something that was just starting to be considered by the law school. So, it can be a very alienating experience for an Aboriginal student coming into particularly legal practice. And there's a picture there. That's the Wallatuka Institute for people that have been to the University of Newcastle. Beautiful, beautiful building, and that houses Wallatuka, which is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Student Support Centre. And so through Wallatuka, I should say I used to work for Wallatuka before I was in this role, in a student advancement role. So I was looking after all of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander law students in the city. And some of the conversations that I had with law students very much still ring, very similar to the experience that I was having, which was, I feel alienated, I feel, isolated, and I'm not sure if this is the right program of study for me. And it's interesting, I've had students, I think often it's not, I guess it's a lack of awareness from some, academics. But sometimes when, if you're sitting in a law class, I've actually had a conversation with a student and the lecturer was talking about a particular case involving an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person, and the law student was related to that person. That's just one example. We have students that often get called upon, I suppose, to provide their input as an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander student. So we have, law lecturers running, and they might, well, as they should, discuss Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues. But we have students that, sometimes are identified as being Aboriginal, and so will be called upon to present, what do you think about this? You're Aboriginal. What's your comments about this? So that's difficult in itself as well. We have, students are here to learn, and absolutely they want it to be a culturally safe place. But when you're called upon every other lecture to provide your perspective as an Aboriginal person, that can be quite fatiguing. So I think it's an interesting space for young Aboriginal students in the law school. And I will say that it's absolutely, I know that here at the University of Newcastle, it is certainly an issue that they are aware of and are absolutely doing the work necessary to make the law school a more culturally safe and supportive place. So I'll just jump over to our next slide, guys. And people here probably have heard of a young woman called Taylor Gray. Now, young Taylor Gray she just graduated, was a student here at the law school in Newcastle. And I guess I just wanted to raise Taylor's experience here at the law school, just to sort of really, I think her experience is it's a good story about an young Aboriginal woman coming to a university, coming to law school, and the difference that can make in someone's life. So people that haven't heard of young Taylor, she's an amazing young woman. She's in that picture there, second from the left. So she came to our university from Dubbo, so she came off country, and she was in our YAPUG program. So we have a program that's for young Aboriginal students to join the university where they haven't quite reached the marks they need to get into their degree. So Taylor came through our Year Pug program and made her way into the law program, and is now just doing some amazing stuff in the community. And you can see that picture there. So, I mean, as a bit of a case study, this picture was taken last year during the Black Lives Matter rallies. And Taylor was then in her final year of law school, and actually took on the police commissioner in a matter in the Supreme Court in order to have the Black Lives Matter rallies held in Newcastle. So we have a pretty amazing scenario in that we have a current law student, an Aboriginal law student that's come from Dubbo, that's in the Supreme Court challenging the New South Wales Police Commissioner to hold our Black Lives Matter rally here in Newcastle. And that was something that was supported by the university, was supported by our law school. And I think this is just a great example of how, what happens when we get this right, what happens when, we make sure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people feel that a legal education is theirs, that they can grab a hold of it and do, use it in the way that they want to use it. And so young Taylor was successful in that Supreme Court case, and the rally went ahead, and you can see there in the background, it was a quite amazing rally. That this is on the intersection of a very busy street in Newcastle, where there was thousands of people that just were flat faced on the ground, saying, "I can't breathe." This was after the death of George Floyd in America. So I think I just mentioned Taylor because I know that the experience that she's had of law school has been very different to other people, 5-10 years ago. And just, if we can get things right, if we can get our law schools to create and allow these sorts of students to step out into the world, we know that we're doing the right thing. And it's this question of what sort of graduates are we wanting to send out into practice? And it's not just our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. Absolutely, we need to empower those students. But I think possibly even more importantly is, how do we educate non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander law students about these issues, so that when they go out to practice and they're out on the front line as solicitors, that they have these understandings and they have pride and a passion for these things as well. And we know that non-Aboriginal students haven't got that understanding and that information from their schooling so far. We're still seeing that even, absolutely schools are getting better, but there are still gaps. And so they're the gaps that we're really trying to fill. So was there any questions or comments by anyone at this point? All good. Please jump in if there is anything, guys. I don't want to talk over anyone. So I guess.
Hi, Loren.
Yeah, sorry.
Hi, I've got a whole series of questions in my mind.
Oh, sure.
I'll just limit it to maybe just one or two for the moment.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I'm really curious to find out whether because you are responsible for young students, is there any program where you sort of encourage and advertise students to, become lawyers, or encourage them, give some information, perhaps whether there's a program within the university to promote Aboriginal students to join the law school? That's one question. And the other question is, you mentioned the law professor who was conducting a course. What course is that? Was it, I'm just curious to know whether there is a particular course within the curriculum in relation to, laws that relates to Aboriginal people.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rowena. So in terms of the program, you can do an elective in our law school, Indigenous People in the Law. So that's an elective that you can do. But in terms of the coursework, and it's fed really well into this next part, Rowena, because the law school at the moment is actually working on an Indigenisation of curriculum project, which means that all courses will be embedded with an Indigenous perspective. And they're doing this really fantastic work led by Dr. Kevin Sobel-Reid, who works in our law school. But you know, the way that he's done that and the way that the law school's done that has been through a process of consultation. So they've been talking to us here in the Office of Indigenous Strategy and Leadership and community to work out, you know, what's the best way to incorporate these knowledges and understandings into a law program. And it's not just by having one, you know, law course that you go in and you do this one course and that's it. It's really about embedding these understandings and tiering them in a way that, you know, first year law students come in and will start to learn about some of these things, but we'll really build upon that. So by fifth year, the graduates that we have coming out of the university will be skilled in, you know, will have the skills necessary to be a legal practitioner, but will also have this cultural knowledge and understanding built inside of that. And so that's how the indigenisation of curriculum will work in the law school. And in terms of access, I mean, yeah, look, I mean, historically, people would know about the difficulties and the barriers to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in coming to university in general. I mean, we didn't have our first Aboriginal graduate until the 60s. And so, you know, there is absolutely, we recognise that there is a gap in getting Aboriginal people into universities. And you can see that, I mean, there was legislation, one of those policies that we mentioned before, the exclusion on demand policy, was a policy that was designed specifically to exclude Aboriginal people from schooling. And so we know that we've had these policies in New South Wales. And so what are we doing about it? You know, when Aboriginal people have been told, schools are not for you, universities are not for you, go away. How do we now make, you know, universities a place to say, this is a safe place for you. Your knowledges are respected here. Your culture is respected here. And that people that are, you know, working here in the university, academics and professionals have those understandings as well. So we do have a pre-entry law program here at the university, which is fabulous. And it means that our students can actually apply to get into law before they sit the HSC. So you can imagine the stress that, if you can remember the stress that goes into sitting your HSC, or you've got kids that are around that age. What that program does is essentially ask students to provide, you know, school reports, letters of recommendation, but they also come in for an interview. So they'll come into the law school and they'll actually sit down and, you know, we talk about, why do you want to study law? You know, what are some of the barriers you think you might have to overcome? But just it's about building that relationship and building that sense of trust of the law school as well. And so when we do those interviews, that means that students actually get told before they've even started their exams whether they've been accepted into the law school or not. And so that program's been running for a couple of years now, and we've had some really good numbers of students coming to it. But that's just one of the that's one of the pre-entry programs that we have in the law school. And as I said again, guys, if you have any questions, just jump in. So currently we are working with the law school to indigenise curriculum, so ensuring that these knowledges and understandings are embedded throughout every aspect of your legal education. So that's really important, having these access points, so the pre-entry law program. But we also, you know, we talk to other areas of the university and places like Wallatuka who have programs like YPUG, these open foundation enabling courses, so that they can feed into the law school as well. But also things like legal clinics and pro bono work. So, you know, at the university, we have a University of Newcastle Law Clinic. We're very lucky. that we have our own legal clinic, and working with the legal clinic to provide more, services and work for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community members. So last year and the year before, we had wills clinics specifically for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So you could come along, get your will done for free. And I think, what was great about that was not just that Aboriginal people would come and get their will done, but it was actually the education and the relationship building between academics and students in the law school who were doing those wills, talking to people in community, sitting down, having a cup of coffee, talking about, meeting people and having that conversation. So it's not just about the will writing. There's so much on the front end of it in terms of relationship building and trust building that's really important with that work. And look, there's other aspects as well. So cultural protection certainly is something that we need to be aware of, not just in the law school, but as a university. We're talking about, protection of, IP. How are we making sure that that applies to Aboriginal cultural knowledge? And this is, I know that there's Terry Jenke in Sydney does a lot of work in this space. In terms of protecting cultural knowledge, because we are, as a university, we're all about the creation of knowledge, and it's it can be very difficult in terms of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledge where it's community owned, but how do we look after that and protect it and make sure that we're not misusing those knowledges? And I guess, we have, I'm assuming, some practicing lawyers on the line who, you might be working for government, you might be working for private practice. I think it's important to, understand that there is a role for everyone in reconciliation, and particularly, lawyers. And I say this when I talk to our other law students, that it is such a privilege to be in this role. It is a privilege to be able to have the power to speak for others. That is a privilege and an opportunity, and I just think it's so important that where we have that privilege, that we identify places and areas that we can give back and look after those who are least fortunate, or who people who are mostly affected by the work in which we do. And when we're lawyers, the Aboriginal people are very much affected by many of the legal actions that are happening in the country. So I think no matter what role you have as a solicitor, as a legal practitioner, there is a space for you here to do the work, to build these relationships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in your communities, in the space in which you work. And, it could be something like, does your organisation have cultural capability training? Is that something that your firm or practice is doing? Is that something that they offer? If not, maybe ask the question, why not? Does your organisation have a RAP? Does it have a reconciliation action plan? I know that the Law Society of New South Wales has one. I think it might have actually expired. But go and have a look at that RAP. So people who don't know what RAPs are, reconciliation action plans, are roadmaps as to how your organisation or business is going to work in this space, how they're going to work towards reconciliation. And it's sort of having a look at your business, your organisation. What is your business goals, and how can you tie reconciliation and embed that into your strategic plans and organisation? So these are questions that you can be asking of your own workplaces. Do we have cultural capability training? Can we have cultural capability training? Do we have a RAP? If you don't have a RAP, you can look into that. But you don't need a RAP to also jump in and get into some of these actions. If it's not something that your organisation is doing, there's nothing stopping you personally from taking some of these actions. So yeah, we've left about 15 minutes there. So I'd like to leave some time for any questions. I realise I've been just talking at you guys for a bit. So yeah, did anyone have anything that they'd like to talk about, or any questions?
Loren, I have a question here. You mentioned about your after you graduate from law school, you practice law for several years, and then go for the current position in the university. So, despite the inequality and the cultural disconnection may happen everywhere, including workplaces, is there any tips you wanted to know or wanted to share with the law students, especially with those Indigenous students from the country, so that they can have a more clear view of their future, maybe in the legal industry, in their illegal career?
Yeah, sure. So I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, so you're talking about students coming in off country, out of community, and coming into the university to study. And certainly there are definitely, unique issues for students, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students that are coming from community, so coming off country where they have, their family, their communities, and then coming to study at university. And so often we talk about this when we do our cultural training, but we talk about this idea of there being sort of two worlds, and those two worlds are different shapes and they don't fit together. And so it's sort of this existence between two spaces where, you have obligations and cultural responsibilities that often don't align with your responsibilities as a student. And look, this applies to our staff as well. It's not just students that have this problem. Even, our Pro-Vice Chancellor talks about this, about having an obligation to the university as our employer, but then the overriding responsibility, or the underlying responsibility, is really to community. And that can be difficult because sometimes those things don't align. But, we have students that, for example, are studying full-time, so they're full-time law students, but because of cultural responsibility and, the way that we're required to look after family, might be financially supporting family back home in community. So, students aren't usually that cashed up. As I recall, pretty struggling full-time students. So they're trying to study full-time, look after all their university staff, probably pay their rent here, but also financially support family members back at home. And, even things like, understanding cultural responsibilities like sorry business, for example. So we have students that, it's an unfortunate but very real fact that Aboriginal people have greater health issues than non-Aboriginal people. We've heard of Close the Gap. And we often have sorry business where someone passes away in community, and we're required to be there to go through certain cultural protocols. When you have to explain that to a lecturer that doesn't have any understanding of that, that's created difficulties at times. So students are saying, look, can I get an extension for this, law assignment? I've got to go and be on country for sorry business. It's about educating, staff within schools and colleges so that they understand what that means. And in that way, we create, if we can create that understanding, we can create the relationship and that sense of belonging and understanding that, yes, I can have my responsibilities back to community, and they're not going to clash with the responsibilities that I have as a student or a staff member. So yes, this sort of, this two worlds idea that, I think it's really just about, the education piece for all staff and all students. And look, not just within the university. And I think it's just something that people need to engage with personally, because we talk about these things and how they affect students and how they affect our staff members in the professional sense. But we're really talking about people's lives, and we're talking about people's hearts when we're talking about truth telling and building this understanding of, the legal framework that's been set up in this country and the experience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, dealing with laws in this country. It's something that, for me as an Aboriginal person, I'm very passionate about, but it's really something that I think, all people should be thinking about, with their hearts. It's something that we can think about academically, but it's also something that we feel. And that's a difficult thing to talk about in a university. Your feelings. It's not something that you can reference and quote, but yeah, I think it's really important.
There's so many. Hello.
Hi.
Yes. Hello. Hi. My name's Maruk.
Hi, Maruk.
There's so many. Hi. There's so many aspects when you bring up a subject like legal education in relation to Aborigines. The one thing is, first of all, if an Aboriginal student goes to university and gets an education, and how are they going to contribute to improving the law? How are they going to contribute towards their own community and maintaining their own laws, and how their laws can sit side by side with, say, Western laws? Do they have to give up one set of laws just to be able to contribute to society? Or can you also have Aboriginal laws coming into the legal system in some form? Because that's a big question, because are they going to totally give up all their culture and their values? So
yeah, that's a key question. Yeah, look, I mean, I haven't practiced as a solicitor for a number of years now, but absolutely that is, I think that's one of the core issues really is, how do we incorporate, the oldest jurisprudence in the world into, one of the newest legal systems in the world? How do we make those things fit together? I'm sure there's a couple of PhDs involved in answering that, but yeah, look, I mean, I think from an educational perspective, I think that, the more that we can have people understanding why the legal system, I guess, is somewhat skewed in terms of perspective, and the difficulties, the differences between those legal systems, and why, the value that comes from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legal systems. And I guess, even just acknowledging that those systems exist, the value in those systems and how we can better incorporate those things. It's a very difficult question, but I think it's something that, people, lawyers and legal academics are starting to consider. I mean, I know that we have things like, you can talk about circle sentencing and things like that, where essentially taking Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing and doing, incorporating that into our Western legal system. But yeah, great question. I'm not sure if I've got the whole answer for it. I'm sorry, but yes, that, for me, it's about if we can educate people that are delivering our legal educations to have that understanding, then that's step one. It's not just this is the legal system, this is black and white, and this is how it is. It's developing that more holistic viewpoint and understanding about, well, yes, this is the Western legal system, but there was one here for a long time before that.
I would turn your attention to two different aspects which are in India. Mm-hmm. One is the Aboriginal problem of bringing people, ameliorating their condition. And we had a similar problem in India, but much worse than the Aboriginal, of the untouchables.
Yep.
And it has been greatly ameliorated their position, but it's taken now 70 years.
Mm.
And it's worth doing a case study and see how that has been done, because people who were totally untouchable, literally, people would turn their face away in the morning because, you know, it's bad luck to look at the person. And now they are equal, and they have been given so many privileges, and they get extra places in university for medicine and so forth, job, you know, special places in government jobs. And over 70 years, they are now, I would say, pretty equal. But that's how long it's been taken to make people change their view of the person, appreciate them, and overcome their prejudices. Now, that's one aspect. So I think it's really worth doing a case study of how that has happened. Another aspect in India is that for literally centuries, different laws, religions, and cultures have lived side by side. So say in marriage laws, the Muslims have marriage laws applying to them, and the Hindus have different, and the Zoroastrians have different, and all these laws have existed side by side. The communities live by their own laws, all within the structure of the whole Indian law, whether it is for wills and inheritance or marriage or divorce. So there can be compatibilities living within big structures. And this is happening and has happened in India. So I just draw that to your attention.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a really, you know, sharing the international experience is as well is really important, because you know, we've got stuff to learn from other nations, absolutely. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting example that you're talking about there. Thank you. I think we've got 5 minutes left. If anyone else had anything they wanted to touch on, or you maybe go and have some lunch for 5 minutes.
Hi, Loren. Yeah, perhaps
Hey.
we should wrap up the session now. I also wanted to add, I practiced in Papua New Guinea for a number of years, and the way the traditional law was incorporated with the Western world was basically they recognized within the Constitution, the law in the country is the common law and custom. So there were, for example, you know, 2 different ways you can get married, and the customary way of getting married was legally recognized because custom was recognized as one of the laws within the country.
Yeah, right. It's really interesting. I mean, as I said, I haven't practiced law for a couple of years now, but you know, even when we talk about, I still think it's, you know, the issue of having no treaty, being the only colonized nation with no treaty, and that issue of sovereignty just still, you know, it is really, I feel like that's really, it's sort of embedded throughout our entire, you know, legislative experience of Aboriginal peoples, this having to prove that, you know, even the cultures and the traditions and the law that we had were legitimate. And yeah, I think that's, you know, this terra nullius, no one's here sort of concept is really sort of, it's washed over, I think, a lot of the way that we that our laws sort of speak to each other. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how these things resolve. And I think, you know, there's a lot more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lawyers, and also a lot more, you know, allies. I think that, you know, there's only so many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in practice, and, you know, we need the other 97% of the population to, you know, stand with us. I think support our knowledge, our, you know, our understandings, and you know, that's what we need. We need good allies in the legal profession.
Loren. So there were a number of comments from the audience appreciating your, basically your explanation, the slides that you brought to really create awareness. There were quite a number of comments from our audience, and it was an amazing and interesting session. And I can see the depth of knowledge that you have as well. Thank you so much for attending our session. We would like to be in contact with you. Our subcommittee would like to contact you again and see how we can assist in this project. For now, I would like to say thank you and Women Lawyers Association in appreciation of you attending this session and, contributing to basically increasing awareness within the profession. They have organized a gift to be delivered to your home.
Lovely, thank you.
So, so I would also like to thank the Law Society who sponsors these events for us. Okay, thank you so much for the seminar again, and we would also like to say thank you to our audience, and let's wrap up here.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.